Not reasonable. This is not.
No, you're being unreasonable. People are dying in Cuba. I care about Cuban lives equally as I care about American lives. I think that they shouldn't be people who live there.
You're making a totally different argument.
No, you guys are complaining that people went over there to get.
American lives is what we care about.
And I care about Cuban lives, too. People who are humans over there are dying because we cut off the energy.
You don't care about Russian lives, or you don't care about... Now you're just being so
What are you talking about? I'm talking about civilian lives.
Deranged and pathological anti-Trump hatred here.
Whoa. Is that Robby Soave? Is that actually Robby Soave actually defending himself on a Hill Rising panel against a leftist that is being incredibly disingenuous against him? I think it is. I think we are in a bizarre series of events. And honestly, I'm 100% here for it because one of my biggest criticisms of Robby Soave is the fact that he kind of lets these people disingenuously walk all over him while he's trying to do a serious panel. And you guys will remember, we've recently covered a Hill Rising segment involving him debating the Nall guy, that Irish guy, related to the New York City terrorist attacks and how Mamdani went out of his way to condemn the peaceful anti-Islamic protesters that were the victims of those attacks rather than the actual terrorists. Yet you had the Nall guy repeatedly not actually addressing the issue at hand, making the claim that Mamdani was actually very good in his condemnation.
Well, Mamdani, as you noted, said that it was never acceptable, criminal and reprehensible.
Exactly what Mamdani said.
I mean, I just said it's not acceptable, and I quoted Mamdani saying it's not acceptable.
Mamdani did a great job. Again, shut up, Nall. And Robby, in that situation, you should have brought this energy, but I'm so happy in this particular case where you're talking about the influencers and whatnot that went to Cuba and were boosting off of the resources of the Cuban people in order to prop themselves up and virtue signal. You finally found your voice. You finally found your spine. And even though it's a little bit bizarre that it would happen at this moment in time, I'm 100% here for it. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Now, the group did face backlash after outlets such as the New York Post reported the group was staying at five-star hotels. Conservative YouTuber Benny Johnson wrote on X, while most of Cuba is in darkness due to power failure, Code Pink and other activists stay at the five-star Grand Hotel Bristol in Havana with generators and luxury service.
So the setup for this particular confrontation between Robby Soave and whoever the hell this woman is of course the left-wing influencer slash activist taking a trip to Havana, Cuba, not to help the Cuban people, but to actually prop up the Cuban regime. And if you guys will recall, we talked about this before. You had Code Pink, their chartered flight that went to Cuba.
So we're on the plane now getting ready to go to Havana, Cuba. We have this entire charter flight full of people, and as important, full of medicines. And we're so excited to be with the Cuban people and show our support, show our solidarity, and to say that this cruel, inhumane, barbaric policy of the Trump administration has to go.
Which, by the way, keen-eyed observers of this channel spotted this woman right here, who I also recognized but could not place, and informed me that this is the same exact rent control supporting socialist in Minneapolis who completely flatlined in a conversation with John Stossel. Let me play the clip of that right here.
Builders still build in Minneapolis. Building permits were up 65% last winter. But in St. Paul, they're down 60%. Because of rent control. You're not going to get more apartments by pushing this.
This pause is one of those rare interview moments where silence reveals so much.
I mean,
don't elected officials research issues before imposing government force on others?
And I just want to say thank you to the commenters, because that was bugging the crap out of me for a very long time who that woman was. But as you could see, the cast of characters on this particular trip were a who's who of absolutely terrible people. Obviously, you had Jank's nephew, who of course was wearing $1,300 glasses. He was wearing like a $400 shirt, a $5,000 total in terms of how he was dressed while he was in Cuba LARPing as a poor communist. By the way, the average annual salary for a Cuban is like $143. You had the Code Pink lady. You had Ilhan Omar's daughter. Again, everyone and anyone that's absolutely terrible on every issue is in favor of the Cuban regime, and that should tell you all you need to know about it. But again, the lies from these particular videos, they just keep coming, and this woman right here, sitting opposite of Robby Soave, is chief among those liars.
Well, there's a law on the books that if you go to Cuba, you can't stay in Cuban-owned properties. So maybe they just stayed in the U.S. hotels. And if a U.S.-owned hotel is out there, I'm sure they have a generator, correct?
Maybe they shouldn't.
So maybe they didn't stay. Maybe they could have stayed in 4-star, but they're going to be somewhere where there's a generator because a Marriott wouldn't have no generator.
So we addressed this before, and I will address it again. The idea that you are mandated, as Cenk's nephew claimed, to stay in 5-star hotels in the nation of Cuba.
Number one, the United States government literally has made it illegal for Americans to stay wherever they want in Cuba. Okay? And the American government makes it illegal for Americans to stay wherever they want when they're in Cuba. They have to stay in what they've declared as 5-star hotels, right?
Is false, wrong, incorrect, not even close, and in fact, ass backwards compared to where he was actually staying, because it turns out the property that they were staying at is on the State Department's list of banned accommodations because it's owned by the Cuban government, and paying to stay there is you providing material support not to the Cuban people, but to the Cuban government. So that's the issue at hand. They're completely lying about this. This woman right here is still lying about this, even though, again, this is easily look-upable information. And you can start to see Robby is feeling the weight of all of my criticisms. Now, do I know that Robby was watching my videos where I was talking about how he gets walked over by these lefties time and time again? No, absolutely not. We're not 100% sure about that. But you know what? Just for this particular video, I am going to will that into factual existence and say that you're welcome, Robby, for me helping you find your spine.
So people that care about other humans went to Cuba to go support them with medical supplies. I don't understand why that would be a problem for the average American that cares about people from other countries, because the people are not bad. They just live in Cuba under a government we don't like. So why should they suffer? They can't access basic needs right now.
The point is to give the government incentive to end some of its policies that we don't like, or to reform itself wholesale to be more democratic, more Western and U.S. friendly. And so providing aid and assistance to the people there is contrary to that mission, and I don't know why we're allowing it if that's what we're doing.
So that Millennial Woes tweet about how a bunch of leftist dialogue is just the leftists pretending not to understand the conversation, therefore there could be no dialogue, is perfectly represented right here, because what Robby is bringing up is that if the U.S. government has a stated policy against the Cuban government, and they're engaging in an action against them right now, then these people shouldn't have gone there in the first place. Then we wouldn't have a conversation about them staying not in American hotels, not in a Marriott, as this woman deliberately was lying about, but in a Cuban government hotel. That power is being diverted from the rest of Cuba in order to support. And again, if you guys will recall, they had a band called Kneecap there, which is LARPing as members of the IRA. They did a pro-Palestine concert.
Palestine, free, free, Palestine, free, free, Palestine, free, free, Palestine, free, free, Palestine.
Drained a bunch of power, and it was hilarious, except for the fact that it's actually sad and worsened the humanitarian crisis, that these people actually tweeted out like 15 minutes after their concert, oh, all of a sudden the power cut, as if the two weren't related. Also, we have plenty of images of these left-wingers essentially going on like a poor people safari, where you could see them photographing the poverty and the destitution of the Cuban people, which, by the way, is caused by the Cuban regime. They've been experiencing blackouts since 2024, well before the evil orange man instituted any kind of oil limitations or anything of the sort on the Cuban people. And this is due to the fact that the Cuban government has not been maintaining their grid because they're a crappy communist hellhole. And again, communism always fails.
You're asking me why people in a humanitarian group want to go give humanitarian aid. I don't understand why that.
I did not ask.
Yeah, you're saying why would they do that when President Trump is trying to stifle the country?
I said we should prevent it.
But why would we do that when people who were in these type of groups try to bring aid to people? The same reason why people were bringing aid in Gaza, because people were dying.
Right.
Yes, I understand they were lifted off Russia recently.
So look, I don't know what happened to Robby Soave. I don't know if he woke up on the wrong side of the bed, but you could already tell that he's had enough of this left-wing nonsense. And what you have right here is somebody with reasonable intelligence speaking to someone with absolutely no intelligence. And he's trying to explain this very slowly to this individual on how, again, this runs contrary to the U.S. foreign policy goal. And therefore, it doesn't make a ton of sense why we're allowing this specifically from Americans. But in addition to that, I will also point out that the so-called aid that is supposed to go to the poor Cubans is going to the Cuban government. And by the way, that is not being stolen by the Cuban government or anything of the sort. The whole point of all these people who quite literally identify as communists going to one of the last remaining communist regimes in the world in order to bring them supplies is to prop up the government. And again, we have a bunch of clips of weird racism from people like Jank's nephew, where he's quite literally repeating Cuban government propaganda about how the Cubans in Miami, they're dirty scumbags.
Cubans, the fucking best people, okay? So kind, so welcoming, just the best. Just the absolute best people. Oh my Lord. Okay? Anyway, but yeah, we worked hard and we were able to set up a goddamn stream, you know?
But the Cubans in Havana, they're amazing in every possible way. They're the ones who stayed. They're the ones who really, really genuinely love Cuba.
Not in Miami. Oh, dude, it's the reversal. It's actually literally like the exact opposite. Like all the good Cubans stayed here. And most of the ones that are crazy just like flew up there. I swear to God. I had a really funny experience with that. It's like we get in the car, we get into Uber last night. Marsh and I are about to discuss that we're gonna be flying to Cuba, like talking about plans, right? And I was like, March, don't say anything, because I noticed that the dude in the car was a Miami Cuban. I was like, don't. Like, I literally went, don't say anything.
It's not like they're stuck in abject poverty because of the authoritarian communist regime. It's just that they're the better people than those bad people in Miami.
I understand that. I understand they were lifted off Iran because the president wants to make his war make sense. So we took sanctions off of our biggest enemy in Russia. And now we're putting sanctions on Cuba, which is not actively our biggest enemy. We just took sanctions off of Russia.
But we can put sanctions.
So I understand exactly how they work and how the president.
So again, Robby right now is talking to somebody who's just trying to distract from the subject matter at hand. And he's trying to explain it slowly. He's like, you understand why we put sanctions on people. And then she says, oh, but we had to lift sanctions in Iran. Again, look over there. Distract from what we're saying right here. And also, oh, we did it to go after Cuba. It was like not our biggest enemy, blah, blah, blah. And honestly, the response from Robby right now at this moment should be, shut up. Shut the hell up. Shut your stupid face. Because essentially she's putting words in his mouth saying, oh, you asked me this when he absolutely didn't. That is her deflection. She's trying to gaslight him in real time. And it's absolutely embarrassing. But again, normally Robby would just let this kind of person spout out their nonsense and just kind of roll over and get to the end of the topic. But guess what? He's not here for that. This is a bizarre day. So Robby is fighting back.
The sanctions, Russia hurt all of Germany, because hurt all of the Europe, because they're providing gas to Germany and other countries there. That's what the pipeline was about. So there are larger geopolitical consequences to doing that we decided are not worth it. Cuba, we suffer very little doing this, and maybe we get a better regime. Maybe we won't, and maybe we shouldn't do it. Obviously,
the
doing
people
the embargo
suffer greatly,
Cuba
though.
for however many decades we did that did not result in the regime being overthrown. So I'm skeptical, I would say, but it's really no skin off our back.
So again, even though Robby is calm right now and honestly probably showing signs of annoyance, he's actually explaining this process quite simply. In reality, the sanctions against Russia, while they might help the Ukraine conflict in the side that we want to prevail as a nation, actually end up hurting Europe. And this is due in large part, the country he mentioned, by the way, is Germany, to Germany idiotically shutting down their nuclear power plants due to the fact that they wanted to go green, not realizing that nuclear energy is in fact, carbon-free energy that actually works. So now they're suffering due to the fact that there are sanctions on Russia because they've become dependent on Russia. By the way, this is something that Trump very famously warned them about prior to any of this stuff with Ukraine going on, and these people laughed at him at the United Nations when he gave those warnings. But now we're in a situation where we have to deal with these nations who did not heed those warnings, who destroyed their own energy capacity, and this woman's just trying to be like, oh my god, the Cubans are suffering. Also, you're doing this to the Russians, and then Robby points out the obvious, which is sanctions on Russia end up hurting the Russian populace, the Russian civilians.
People suffer in Russia. They suffer in North Korea. Whenever we put sanctions, the people suffer.
Russia is a very powerful country. People are not without lights and basic needs right now because of anything that the U.S. has done.
Sanctions raise the prices for people internally.
People in Cuba have no electricity. They cannot go to the hospital to get basic procedures.
So our sanctions are
so I'm
effective.
asking you.
But this is what the goal of sanctions is to lower the standard of living.
The president never explained to Congress that he wanted to put sanctions on Cuba
reform
because he went to Venezuela.
It's just effective this time.
Okay. And people who are in humanitarian groups go to countries to help save lives, as they did in Gaza. Because the people who live there actually need help.
We shouldn't bother doing the sanctions in the first place.
No, the president shouldn't bother getting involved in international conflicts with no plan that's thoroughly thought through.
You say
and so this is the
plan,
exact...
but I keep explaining to you what the plan is.
The plan is just to make them suffer and then make them cower to us, which they have shown no intention on doing.
So again, this whole thing is that Millennial Woe's tweet about this woman deliberately pretending not to understand while Robby is explaining it over and over again exactly what the plan is. And again, this is due in large part to the fact that this woman is Trump deranged, but also due to the fact that the left is fundamentally anti-American. It's all one issue, people. It's anti-Western, anti-American, and that's what we're seeing on display right here.
Then they suffer a little bit more.
Okay, and then what?
And then their government can call up President Trump and give him what he wants.
No, that's not a good way to govern. And that's not.
You say no, but that's what we're going to do.
No, they're not doing that, though. Iran hasn't done that yet. They said they're not calling the president, and Cuba hasn't done that.
Give them time.
Okay, so we're just sitting here losing American lives in Iran. We're sitting here killing
American lives in Iran. We're not losing American lives in Iran.
Over the war, we're losing military. How many people have died already? How many military personnel have died? So over the war. So maybe not in Iran exactly, but over this Iran war, we're losing American lives.
Well, we're not losing
We've killed children in Iran. And so now I'm just giving you examples of while the president uses his strategy of suffer endlessly.
Not reasonable. This is not.
No, you're being unreasonable. People are dying in Cuba. I care about Cuban lives equally as I care about American lives. I think that they shouldn't be people who live there.
You're making a totally different argument.
No, you guys are complaining that people went over there to get.
American lives is what we care about.
Oh, I love that. I love the fact that Robby just lost it right there. And again, as somebody who has watched Robby on the Hill Rising and has not liked him in comparison to somebody like Amber Duke, who is very good at standing up for herself, you absolutely gotta love the fact that Robby was just not having it anymore. And that bleep was very long. And yeah, his point is actually quite salient. This woman is saying, oh, she cares about civilian lives and whatnot, but she was against removing the sanctions from Russia, which hurt civilians in Russia, but again, she's in favor of it in this scenario in, again, Cuba.
And I care about Cuban lives too. People who are humans over there are dying because we cut off the energy.
You don't care about Russian lives, or you don't care about, now you're just being so
What are you talking about? I'm talking about civilian lives.
And pathological anti-Trump hatred here.
No, I don't. People are going over there to give humanitarian aid where we've cut off electricity, and you're upset about it? Why?
Because it's contrary to the goal of trying to make...
The president has no goal or no plan. It's not a good strategy. He's all over the place.
You are interfering with the strategy. The strategy is to sanction, embargo the island so that the people complain to the government and the government is forced to reform its policies toward the U.S. in exchange for the U.S. lifting the sanctions.
And the reason for that is because she actually supports the communist regime of Cuba, and she wants the energy pressures on Europe because, again, it's all one issue, it's all anti-West, but it's so good to see Robby just stand up to this woman, scream in her stupid face, give her a little bit of shock, and again, it's bizarre for Robby to do this. So bizarre. Bizarre. Okay, but you know what? I'm here for Bizarro Robby. We're all here for Bizarro Robby because that woman really just needs to shut her stupid face.
That was the same deal with Russia, the same deal with North Korea, the same deal with Iran. This is the same tool we use. It is not always effective, you're right, because sometimes we relent, or sometimes the sanctions aren't effective enough to motivate different government behavior. And sometimes we give the blowback to us is too catastrophic because we're relying on the thing from the country. But that does not apply to Cuba because it's not harming us whatsoever. It's harming the people of Cuba, but that's part of the strategy. So do you see why that's a non sequitur to say, but we're harming them? Yes, that's the part of the policy. So that's always the part of the sanctioned policy. It just doesn't always work well enough because the harm is not great enough or it hurts us in response.
Look, I honestly love this because Robby is explaining this to her like she's a child, but the thing is, children can typically take in new information. They could typically learn things, and I'll leave the full episode in the description of this video so you guys could check it out for yourself. But needless to say, let me just give you a little bit of a taste of her response to that, because what it is her going back to point one, which is always her deflection point whenever Robby explains the policy.
If we go to the core of the issue, there's a humanitarian crisis within Cuba that we've created by pulling their oil shipments.
This entire video is her saying the policy is totally incomprehensible, Robby explaining the policy in a way that any normal person of average or even below average intelligence could understand, and then her saying humanitarian crisis, the humanitarian crisis, they needed to have their stupid Palestine concert there and, to use up all their energy because there's a humanitarian crisis.
And all the people are hurting in the meantime.
I don't know how many more times I can tell you that the plan which Trump has laid out is very clear.
So I do appreciate Robby trying to explain this again and again and again to this woman, but eventually you gotta realize that you're talking to a wall and throw this woman off the damn set because she's ridiculous, she's absurd, and she's never actually ever going to understand, even though she does understand, she's never going to admit that, and therefore the dialogue is completely pointless. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Robby Soave losing his mind, going bizarro Robby, and us being 100% here for it. Till next time.